Before Michael Myers, Freddy Krueger, or Jason Voorhees, there was another figure who loomed in the shadows, and his name was Billy, an anonymous killer who helped redefine horror and lay the foundation for the slasher genre as we know it. Welcome to Stepping Stones to Slasher, an exploration of the various films which paved the way for the slasher genre of the 1980s. Let's begin this journey with a Canadian Proto-Slasher film from 1974. Black Christmas is often cited as one of the earliest slasher films, released 4 years before John Carpenter's Halloween would cement the genre's tropes. Directed by Bob Clark and written by Roy Moore, the film follows a group of sorority sisters terrorized by a mysterious killer during the holiday season. It blends psychological terror, unsettling atmosphere, and outright brutality to create a film that still unnerves audiences nearly 50 years later. But what makes Black Christmas so revolutionary? For one, it borrowed many of the tropes that would eventually go on to define the slasher genre. The ominous POV shots from the killer's perspective, the helpless victims, the unique kills, and the idea of terror in a seemingly safe suburban environment. Though the film did not pioneer any of these individual tropes, the combination of them as well as the execution of them would prove to be inspiring and would contribute to a greater template which could be duplicated for future films. First, let's talk about the Jallo Influence. For those new to the term, giallo films are Italian thrillers that peaked in the 1960s and 70s, characterized by stylish cinematography, whodunit plots, and brutal, often artistic depictions of violence. The first major giallo, The Girl Who Knew Too Much, 1963, directed by Mario Bava, featured actor John Saxon, who also stars in Black Christmas as Lieutenant Fuller. This tie alone is less of a true connection and more of a trivial coincidence. As giallo continued into the 70s, we saw more and more of the stylistic trappings which would be borrowed by American filmmakers and used in slasher films. Director Bob Clark admitted to being influenced by this Italian style of suspenseful storytelling, particularly the use of point-of-view shots, which were a staple in giallo. In Black Christmas, the killer's perspective is frequently shown, emphasizing the voyeuristic tension and psychological terror often seen in gialli like Dario Argento's The Bird with the Crystal Plumage, 1970, and Mario Bava's A Bay of Blood, 1971. The focus on atmosphere, combined with Clark's use of shadowy lighting and eerie soundscapes, reflects a direct lineage from Italian predecessors. Check out The Bird with the Crystal Plumage, A Bay of Blood, and Torso, 1973 by Sergio Martino, as some prime giallo film examples which give off early slasher film vibes. But what sets Black Christmas apart is how it shifts the giallo formula closer to what we now recognize as the slasher. The film introduces key tropes: a group of victims confined to a specific setting, the sorority house, an anonymous killer, and inventive personal murders. While giallo killers often had psychological motives tied to complex backstories, the Black Christmas murderer remains an enigma. His chilling phone calls add a deeply unsettling layer, replacing a motive with pure chaos, a harbinger of Michael Myers and Jason Voorhees. Clark's choice to set the film in a sorority house brought a sense of contemporary Americana to the formula. The victims, while vulnerable, are multidimensional, with their own personalities and issues. This focus on young, relatable characters would become a defining trait of slashers like Halloween 1978 and Friday the 13th 1980. But here, they feel arguably the most authentic. One of Black Christmas's most discussed elements is its portrayal of young women navigating independence and personal agency in a world that doesn't always respect or support them. And whereas many horror movies of this period have been retroactively labeled as feminist, this film genuinely has a feminist streak. The film is centered on a sorority house where each main character embodies different facets of womanhood. Jess, the protagonist, is particularly significant as she confronts her boyfriend Peter over her decision to have an abortion. Critics have praised this subplot for its boldness, especially in 1974, the year after Roe v. Wade. Jess's firm stance on her decision reflects a growing feminist consciousness of that era, and her resilience in the face of pressure from Peter marks her as a proto-feminist final girl. Film critic Alexandra West highlights how Jess defies the archetype of a passive victim, showcasing her independence and strength. This is evident not just in the scenes with her boyfriend, but also in the climax where Jess decides to not escape the house, but to endeavor to rescue her friends upstairs. Barb, one of the most outspoken and rebellious characters, embodies a rejection of the traditional feminine. Her heavy drinking, brash humor, and open sexuality challenge societal expectations, but in classic slasher form, she becomes a target for judgment, not just from the killer, but from those around her. Barb's fate has been interpreted as a cautionary tale about how society punishes women who refuse to conform, making her a tragic counterpoint to Jess's more measured rebellion. Claire is the quintessential good girl archetype, soft-spoken, polite, and morally upstanding. Critics have often viewed Claire as a representation of traditional female virtues that were idealized at the time. However, her early death subverts this trope, highlighting the vulnerability of women regardless of their adherence to societal expectations. This subversion acts as a critique of the false security offered by conformity, showing that danger lurks even for those who follow the rules. Claire's fate underscores one of the film's feminist messages, that the real threat lies not in individual behavior, but in a world that often devalues and endangers women. Phil, on the other hand, is portrayed as intelligent, dependable, and down-to-earth. She represents the solidarity and strength found in female friendships. While not as outspoken or defiant as other characters like Barb, Phil is a grounding force within the sorority, showcasing a quieter form of empowerment through her loyalty and support for her friends. Critics often point to Phil as a symbol of unity and the importance of collective female resilience in the face of external threats. Her character reflects the emerging feminist idea that women are stronger together when they support one another. Mrs. Mack is the house mother of the sorority, and her role is a fascinating mix of comedy and complexity. While her outwardly maternal role suggests she should be a protector, Mrs. Mack often subverts this expectation. Her humorous alcoholism and irreverent attitude challenge traditional maternal stereotypes, showing a woman who operates outside the bounds of societal expectations for older women. At the same time, her protective instincts toward the girls show her deep care for them, even if she doesn't embody traditional notions of nurturing. Mrs. Mack represents an older generation of women who have lived within a more traditional framework, but found ways to assert their independence and irreverence within it. The sorority house setting adds another layer of thematic depth, portraying the challenges of young people living away from home for the first time. The women in the film must grapple not only with the external threat of the killer, but also with the emotional vulnerabilities and newfound responsibilities that come with adulthood. Critics have noted that the house serves as a microcosm for the turbulence of growing up, where bonds of friendship are tested, individuality is forged, and the safety nets of childhood are no longer present. Writer and critic Adam Scoville, in a piece for The Quietus, emphasized how Black Christmas uses its university setting to explore the dangers of independence. This includes both the literal threats from the film's antagonist and the societal threats of misogyny, isolation, and a lack of institutional support, represented by the dismissive attitude of police officers like Sergeant Nash. The absence of parental figures and the failure of authority figures reflect the anxieties many young people face when transitioning into adulthood. This also tends to connect thematically with classic urban legends, which often serve as cautionary tales concerning female independence. The film also addresses the larger societal issue of violence against women. The killer's obscene phone calls, a blend of sexual harassment, psychological torment, and nonsensical rage, symbolize the pervasive threats women can often face. Another recurring theme in Black Christmas is the intrusion of violence into spaces traditionally seen as private and safe. The sorority house, often depicted as a bastion of sisterhood and safety, becomes the hunting ground for the killer. The film's use of the killer's POV camera shots emphasizes this violation, as audiences are forced to see the house and its inhabitants through his invasive gaze. Although, I would argue this is less about putting us in his shoes to make a statement about our obsession with violence, and more to simply hide the face of the killer from the audience. Scholar Carol J. Clover, in her landmark book Men, Women, and Chainsaws: Gender in the Modern Horror Film, notes that Black Christmas predates the slasher genre's obsession with domestic spaces being turned against their inhabitants. The film also critiques authority figures and institutions as mentioned earlier. The police, represented by the inept Sergeant Nash, and the well-meaning but ultimately ineffective Lieutenant Fuller, fail to protect the women or take their concerns seriously until it's too late. This echoes broader societal criticisms of the time, particularly regarding the dismissive attitudes of law enforcement towards women's safety. The film's message is clear. Young women are often left to fend for themselves, even in the face of clear danger. Film historian Kirla Janice, House of Psychotic Women, has argued that Black Christmas remains a vital text in feminist horror, pointing out how it challenges the viewer to think critically about gender, power, and the social dynamics that shape our lives. Black Christmas left a direct imprint on John Carpenter's Halloween. Carpenter was reportedly impressed by Bob Clark's film and drew inspiration from its mix of tension, pacing, and the killer's omnipresence. Bob Clark himself once claimed that Carpenter had asked about making a sequel to Black Christmas, which planted the seed for Halloween. According to Clark, Carpenter had asked him what his possible plans for a potential sequel would be. Clark, who had no intention to remain directing horror, humored Carpenter by saying that the killer would have to be captured, institutionalized, and eventually escape, prompting him to go on a new killing spree. Clark alludes to this aspect of Halloween's plot as the catalyst to how his idea had inspired Carpenter's film. Now, whether that's myth or fact, the DNA of Black Christmas is evident in Halloween's use of first-person camera work, the concept of a stalker lurking in suburbia, and its focus on suspense over gore. By 1980, Black Christmas had cemented its legacy as a genre pioneer. The success of slashers like Friday the 13th and A Nightmare on Elm Street owe much to the groundwork laid by Bob Clark. Even elements like Black Christmas's ambiguous, haunting ending echo through the decades, as many slashers later adopted its open-ended finales to keep killers shrouded in mystery, and probably true to a studio standpoint, open to sequels. Yet, what truly sets Black Christmas apart is its tonal balance. Clark's incorporation of humor, mainly through characters like Barb and Mrs. Mack, softens the tension without undermining the horror. This approach mirrors some giallo films, where moments of levity coexisted with grisly violence. While Black Christmas is sometimes overshadowed by Halloween, it's impossible to ignore its role in shaping the modern slasher. It serves as a bridge between the stylistic brutality of giallo and the formulaic slasher craze of the 1980s. Its bold narrative choices, like centering on women and tackling taboo subjects, also paved the way for more nuanced storytelling in horror, and it remains genuinely terrifying. While Black Christmas didn't invent the slasher genre outright, and there do exist a dozen or so older films centered around serial killers, its influence is undeniable. The chilling idea of a killer lurking in a house, stalking victims one by one, became a blueprint for countless slasher films that followed. And to address where Black Christmas is lacking in regards to a true slasher, firstly, the movie is incredibly tame in the nudity and sex department. The phrases sex and violence and tits and ass are not really applicable to Black Christmas. Secondly, the killer is not revealed at the end. Slashers behave very much like modern monster movies, but say, the Wolfman has now been replaced by a psycho killer, as the audience's fears evolved to us being afraid more of external threats from within our own society versus outside it. But still, it's rare for slashers to not give us the catharsis at the end by revealing the killer and then disposing of them. Black Christmas, true to Bob Clark's style of directing, does not pay off for us by design. This serves to anger the audience and forces them to reflect more on all of those societal themes I'd mentioned earlier in this video. I would also argue that giallo usually needs a whodunit or a solid mystery which must be solved. Slasher needs catharsis. The final girl must prevail. Lastly, I'll mention that the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, which had come out months earlier in 1974, similarly does not give us the full cathartic ending associated with later slashers. But that's a beast for another time. Now, whether you view Black Christmas as a proto-slasher, or perhaps even as one of the first giallo-inspired films, or none of the above, it's a masterclass in horror filmmaking that still holds its power today. Despite its mixed reception upon release, Black Christmas has earned a dedicated cult following. Its legacy is celebrated not just for its role in shaping the slasher genre, but also for its eerie, ambiguous ending, which leaves viewers haunted long after the credits roll. The film has been remade twice, in 2006 and 2019, but neither version has captured the raw terror and innovation of the original. For fans of horror, Black Christmas remains a chilling and all too realistic portrayal of the fears and dangers faced by young people navigating the adult world for the first time and away from home. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. I invite you to leave your thoughts, questions, comments, curiosities, or concerns in the comments section, but please be polite. Disagreements and discussions are welcome, but be respectful of others. This series, by the way, was not in order of films which paved the way to slasher. I just wanted to get a Christmassy video out this week. Feel free to comment which films you consider as stepping stones to slashers, and we'll explore that. Thank you very much for your continued support. This is Tanner Leeser for The King in Giallo, and if nothing else, I'll see you next time.
Oh, God damn it, Claude, you little prick! This is very kind of you, Mr. Harrison.